Now, back to Access Tech Live, the latest in tech and accessibility with Stephen Scott and Marc Aflalo.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Access Tech Live. I'm Stephen Scott. Marc Aflalo is with me. And don't forget, all the conversations that we're having, you can catch up with on AMI Plus and also on YouTube as well. Marc, a really interesting conversation today on the state of the nation when it comes to cybercrime and staying safe online.
Oh, absolutely. And our next guest is going to be, contributing to that conversation. Rajiv Gupta is the Associate Head for the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, and he joins us now. Rajiv, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, great to meet you, Rajiv. I want to ask you, first off, how many acts of cybercrimes happen in Canada every year?
So difficult to measure, right? So as a cyber center, we always encourage voluntary reporting. So from our perspective, it's businesses that are calling into us to report cyber crimes. That is obviously very underreported. So we don't usually publish the numbers. In 2022, we had said it was just over 200 ransomware events that we'd seen, but that's by no means cybercrime. When you get into actual cybercrime and fraud, we work very closely with the RCMP and the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre as well. And in 2023, they had said that there was over 62,000 reports of fraud in Canada, which is a pretty ridiculous number.
Yeah, I guess there's a fine line there, right? Because, getting a text with a link is technically cybercrime. Getting an email is cybercrime. So where is that line? Is there a line, or is it just all fraud at this point is just considered somewhat cybercrime?
Well, all of those digital, like cyber malicious activities, they're crimes in Canada. So we always encourage, report them to the police of jurisdiction as well as the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre. When it gets into businesses where they're, we would like to know from a cyber center perspective, we work with businesses, whether they're critical infrastructure, government, et cetera, right? So that's really where we draw the line. But at the same point in time, these are all criminal acts, but there's so many and there's so many variants, it's difficult to track on an ongoing basis within Canada.
Have we seen an uptick since these large language models and AI have become a little bit more, more publicly focused? Have we seen a more uptick, or is it really not measurable yet?
Well, it's hard to attribute the activity to actual large language models. We've seen, the activity grow year over year from a cyber criminal perspective. Where we're seeing the AI involvement, this is something that we'd put in our National Cyber Threat Assessment from 2022, which was a look forward into 2023 and 2024. And we had said that the usage of AI, in particular LLMs or large language models and generative AI, would be enabling cyber threat actors to actually, pursue what their means, right? Which is really making money through cyber criminal means. We are seeing, better, crafted spear phishing emails. We know that cyber criminals are going to use AI to augment what they do with respect to the whole, ransomware ecosystem and that exists nowadays. But at the same point in time, we're also using AI within the Cyber Center to make sure that we can protect both the government better and leverage our defenses better in that sense as well. So, we're hoping to use it in a defensive way, but it's also enabling cyber criminals to pursue what they're doing.
See, I find this whole subject very interesting because we talk about cybercrime today on the show. And I think to myself, I don't consider a text message, like Marc was saying there, a text message to be cybercrime. I just think of that as a text, and I usually just delete it. I wouldn't even think about reporting it necessarily. So is it perhaps the case that these numbers that you're talking about are actually way higher?
Absolutely. We know that, right? We know that we think we get a small percentage of what's really happening in Canada reported to us. Both on the individual cybercriminal activity that happens to individuals, but also on a business level in terms of critical infrastructure as well. So we know they're underreported. We want people to report. The more we know about the landscape, the more we can actually put out the right advice and guidance. The more government can actually make solid policy decisions and really recognize the scope of the problem. Very important to report as well. But then, we have put programs in place. When you think of, like you just mentioned, the text message. So within Canada, we're working with telcos on a program where you can actually forward the text message to 7726. And if it's a malicious message, then we'll work jointly with the telecom providers to take down those websites, to make sure those malicious links, to make sure they don't impact other Canadians.
That is excellent. That's a fantastic service to be aware of. And of course, a great way for people to report it, which helps give you a bigger picture of what's actually going on. That is fantastic. It might be an obvious answer to this, maybe not, but is there a particular segment of the population that's more susceptible to acting on messages or emails that they get? Perhaps, the obvious answer to this might be older people, but What's your take on that? What's your data on that?
I would say that we would hesitate to say that there's any segment that's not targeted, right? So we would say that the threat is there for everyone. Different people will be more susceptible to clicking on different things, and the threat actors know that, and they'll target their types of lures or the types of intent behind their messaging to actually attract that demographic to click on the messages. So we always say, be skeptical of the information you receive in a healthy way. You have to be discerning of the messages you receive, question whether it's, a real message, whether it's coming from a legit source, and use whatever context you have to make sure that you're, double checking before you're clicking on any of these things.
I'm very aware of phishing. I'm very aware of the text scams that are out there. So I do my best to report, but I didn't think I was in the minority of people when I try to report it. That text number again, was it 7727 you said? You can just forward the text. 7726. That's brilliant, because I was actually looking just the other day. It was during the Super Bowl. I got a message that said, your phone number has been updated in your RBC profile. Click here to verify it. And, I knew it from the start. Obviously I wouldn't get a text message like this, but they're just getting smarter. They're just getting smarter and more creative, and guaranteed when I clicked that link, it would look really, really close to that RBC website when they tried to get my username and password. Other than phishing, though, what other forms of attacks should we be on the lookout for that we may not be programmed to yet really just see?
Well, I would say that phishing is a big part of it, but really phishing takes different forms as well. So sometimes it's just getting that message that makes you click on the link. Another very common way that threat actors get access to accounts and other sensitive information is really by people giving up their credentials, right? So their usernames and passwords. So you have to be very careful in terms of where you're entering your username and password, how those are being collected, making sure they're at legitimate sites. And often a phishing email will have a link to a site that actually encourages you to give up your username and password or other sensitive information. And then that information is resold on the dark web so that other cyber criminals can use your username and password for whatever they are going to do. If it's a password for an individual, it could be selling that account online. If it's a password that gives access to an organization, then that could actually just be creating access to another ransomware group that they also sell online through the dark web, and that just gives another cyber criminal group the ability to go and ransomware an organization. So I guess at the most basic level, it's protecting your identity and your password, and being careful about how you actually use those credentials.
And they're really fast. Like, I've heard stories where you type in that username and password, and within minutes they're already compromising your account. So don't suspect that just because you clicked on it that you shouldn't act like, oh, nothing's going to happen to me. These are things that you got to be very aware of, and I think that's important. Stephen?
Yeah, I agree. And I think, there is another side to this, though, I think that's important. And it's the language, I think, around all of this sometimes that kind of confuses people. And it probably doesn't help your cause either, because you're trying to make people aware of these issues, make people report them. But even the language around it could be confusing, right? I mean, when I was growing up, phishing was a nice pastime with dad. Nowadays, it's taking over my email account and terrifying the heck out of me. How do you get across the language and the meaning of some of these terms we throw around?
It's all education, right? It's a new domain, and some of us are, newer to technologies and others as well. But it's about educating people right from the start. We have a Get Cyber Safe campaign from the Cyber Center that we're trying to push out, information as to how to protect your devices, how to protect your accounts, how to be safe online. Socializing the terms like phishing, smishing, vishing, these sorts of things, but then also reinforcing all the really important elements of being safe online, which is understanding, what controls are in your social media accounts and how you can lock those down, how you can get properly strong authentication with multi-factor authentication and stronger passwords and these sorts of things. But it's all basically building up a cognitive digital resilience in our society. It's an all of society challenge. And we have to educate ourselves. We have to know what's available. And we're trying from our perspective in terms of having the Get Cyber Safe campaign and reaching out and doing shows like this as well, which is very useful. And thanks for hosting me.
Well, that's kind of the thing, right? We want to be able to get people at least to get to the point where they start questioning these terms, questioning all of this, and finding out about your service, of course, is a big part of that. Okay, let's talk about the worst case scenario here. Someone has clicked the link or tapped on the message and gone through and had their data vished and smished and whatever else. What happens next? Is there any recourse here? What happens to someone who falls victim?
Yeah, so for individuals, we always recommend talking to the, reporting to the police of jurisdiction if it's sort of, and then look at what the provider is. If it's financial, reach out to your bank, make sure you notify them of what's happened, see what recourse is available there. The Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre has lots of useful advice and guidance as well, so that's an opportunity to report to the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre as well. If it's a business, whether small business or critical infrastructure, especially, is where the Cyber Center comes in, because, we've seen lots of these compromises. And often when we talk to large organizations, when they get compromised by ransomware or some other sort of cyber actor, it's one of their worst days of their lives in terms of trying to get their organization back online while losing money and downtime if their systems have been put out of service from the cyber criminal. And the Cyber Center has seen many, many of these over the years, and we're happy to help. So we always encourage people to reach out. We're happy to provide advice and guidance. We're happy to, give them other information to help understand the extent of the compromise within their organization. And even if need be, we can actually send people to site to work with them to help them mitigate and provide them the advice and guidance that they need to properly recover from the event in a safe way. So different scopes in terms of whether it's an individual, a small business, or a large critical infrastructure provider, but definitely, different elements within government that can certainly help, and local police is being important for the average Canadian.
It's great to know these resources are out there. And so we got the text number. What other ways can people report crimes and today if they wanted to?
Yeah, so crimes, the police of jurisdiction, right? So depending on what jurisdiction you're in, but then the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre, and then the Cyber Centre is definitely, contact at cyber.gc.ca or 1-833-CYBER-88. And if it's, we tend to focus on businesses, but even if it's not business, we'll make sure the person gets routed to the right other government organization to make sure they get the help that they need.
Rajiv, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. This has been enlightening. You're welcome back anytime you need to help spread some of that message. We'll gladly do that for you.
Well, thank you very much.
When we come back, we get to your answers to our question of the day. Stick around. This is Access Tech Live.
There's more Access Tech Live to come. Get involved and have your say at Access Tech Live on social media. We'll be right back.